They strapped a yellow band on her wrist, labeled her No Speak. Marge Keating, retired speech therapist and widow, didn't flinch. Her daughter played hostess. Her granddaughter live-streamed her like a silent prop. By Monday, both would be stripped from her will, her medical rights, and her deed. She'd spent decades giving others their voices. Now she was reclaiming her own with legal fire. And when they came to manage her life, they walked into a courtroom she'd already furnished. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. They said it was for my comfort. The band said, No Speak. The ballroom smelled of lemon oil and linen starch, pristine, polished, and polite to a fault. Soft jazz floated through a Bluetooth speaker near the baby grand, and waitstaff moved in formation like they'd trained for a wedding, not a birthday. But it wasn't the chandeliers or the chilled rosé that caught Marjorie Keating's attention. It was how people looked at her. Or didn't. Some smiled too long before drifting away, eyes flicking downward, apologetic. Others nodded distantly, as if unsure whether she could see or hear. A few gave her the sort of head tilt reserved for hospice patients or confused toddlers. Marge sat upright, spine straight despite the weight of her silk cardigan, legs crossed at the ankle just like she'd been taught in charm school in '61. Her lip tint was perfect, her pearls real. She wasn't frail, but she was being treated like a glass of milk left too long in the sun. She caught her reflection in a mirrored pillar, the pale blue blouse Laura had chosen, the subtle blush, the tasteful earrings, and something else. There, around her left wrist, was a soft yellow band. Not medical, not fashionable, just bold black letters. No Speak. A hollow click echoed in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. Mom. Laura's voice purred beside her, voice just loud enough to be heard, but low enough to sound confidential. It's just so guests know you're, not expected to keep up with long conversation. Less stressful that way. Marge turned her head, slow and deliberate, eyes narrowing like a fox catching scent. Laura's smile widened. Too white, too rehearsed. It's standard here, I swear. You've said yourself how loud things get. This just helps manage expectations. Across the room, a pair of women clinked glasses and whispered. One pointed toward Marge's table, the other gave a sympathetic nod, the kind usually followed by a casserole and a eulogy. A voice rang out, high and chipper. Live stream starting. Say hi, Graham. Alyssa, lashes thick and glowing under a beauty light clipped to her phone, angled the camera down toward the table. 3 generations of women, Grandma Marge, my mom, and... She paused, glancing toward Marge. Well, kinda. Sorta laughter. Alyssa laughed at her own line. Laura chuckled along, a half-second late. The comment ticker on her phone blinked in rapid succession. Marge didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply watched, quiet as a snowdrift before an avalanche. A waiter poured cucumber water into her glass with gentle hands. You doing okay, Miss Marge? He whispered kindly. She nodded once, eyes never leaving her granddaughter's phone screen. Alyssa turned the camera to herself. It's actually so beautiful here, like, way nicer than I thought. They do memory care stuff, but they're also really good with elder luxury. I'd totally book a bridal shower here. Marge took a slow sip of water, letting the coolness roll across her tongue. Her pulse was steady. Her hands, still ringed with her wedding band and the antique garnet Ken had once insisted be appraised, just in case, rested lightly on her lap. They think I'm gone, she thought, not dying. Just erased. A waiter brushed past with a tray of tiny quiches, and Laura waved him away. Mom can't chew anything too dense, remember? Marge blinked. She'd eaten steak last Tuesday. She looked again at the wristband. A synthetic loop, Velcro fastened, bright and soft like a child's hospital tag. No Speak. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. A sentence passed without a trial. The pianist started a new song. Something light and nostalgic, Nat King Cole, maybe. And in that moment, Marge remembered every voice she'd ever coached. The quiet stutterers, the car crash victims, the stroke survivors who'd wept when they finally managed to say thank you out loud. She had spent her life giving people back their voices, and now hers had been taken with a color-coded lie. A hand touched her shoulder. Mara, crisp blazer, cane in one hand, eyes sharp as ever. "Just here for the cake," she murmured with a wink. Marge smiled. A real one. The pianist hit a sour note, or maybe it just felt wrong now. Too pretty for a party laced in quiet deceit. Marge placed her napkin on the table, calmly lifted her wrist, and with one slow, deliberate motion, peeled off the yellow band. The Velcro made a soft rip. No one noticed. No one looked, except Mara, who tilted her head and smirked knowingly. Marge folded the band into a neat square and slid it into her clutch. The pianist kept playing. Alyssa kept recording. Laura kept lying. But Marge had remembered everything. And now they would never forget what she was about to do. The house smelled like lemon disinfectant and new wood polish. Laura had insisted on having it refreshed while Marge was at the memory care party. The place looked unfamiliar in a way that didn't feel like cleaning. It felt like staging. The pillows were rearranged into sharp, unnatural triangles. A silver tray sat on the coffee table with untouched crystal coasters. Even the family photos had been thinned out, only the curated ones remained. Marge walked slowly, not from weakness, but precision. The heels of her orthopedic wedges tapped softly across the hardwood. She paused near the fireplace, hand brushing the mantel where a photo of her late husband once stood. Gone now. Replaced with a bland canvas print of abstract leaves. She heard typing in the next room. Quick, confident strokes. Laura's rhythm. Marge turned the corner into the kitchen just as Laura closed a cabinet. Her laptop sat open on the counter, angled away, screen aglow. A second glass of wine, untouched, sat next to hers. "Oh, hey, Mom," Laura said too brightly. "Just checking on the, utilities stuff. Ken's thinking of bundling everything. Easier, right?" Marge smiled gently. "Of course, dear. I'll go sit down a bit." Laura returned to her laptop, distracted. Marge turned, then paused, one hand on the chair for balance, and glanced back just once. A quick flick of her eyes. A numbers-filled spreadsheet, white on black, top row highlighted in orange. Her name in the table. MJK Holdings / Estate Flow Plan - Final - Can Edit. She didn't need more than a second. Her brain did the math before her eyes finished the rouse. Projected transfer, August. Total liquidation, 89%. Phase 3, asset recapture complete by Q4. Memory care discretionary fund, 5-year taper plan. It was all there, legal terms dressed up in polite theft. Marge kept walking, quietly opening the hall closet, pretending to rummage. She pulled out a throw blanket and held it close, fingers shaking, not from fear, but fury looking for a place to land. She passed the dining room where Ken stood with a phone to his ear, sipping bourbon. He was talking low and clipped. "She won't notice the fund shifts, it's all under estate upkeep, reclaiming what's inefficient. Emotional assets are the most expensive and they age like milk." He chuckled. Marge's grip on the blanket tightened. She held it against her chest like a shield. Upstairs, in her bedroom, she closed the door with care and locked it. The room smelled like cedar and rose, the scent diffusers Laura insisted on using. Marge knelt slowly beside the armoire, moved aside a decorative storage bin, and pulled up the edge of the closet carpeting. Beneath it, a small hatch in the floorboard. She pried it open and reached inside the narrow space, pulling out a cloth bundle wrapped in an old knitting bag. She hadn't knitted in years, but some things were worth disguising. Inside, bank records, birth certificates, original estate deeds, and a plain black notebook, handwritten, detailed, double-backed with every major decision since 1989. She sat on the edge of the bed, heart steady, then reached for the landline, not the house phone Laura insisted on forwarding to voicemail, but the hard line hidden inside her closet drawer. 2 rings. "Mara speaking?" "Mara, it's time." A pause. Then, "What do you need?" "I need Mr. Doran," quietly, no digital trails. Mara didn't ask why. "I'll call in a favor. 24 hours." A long breath passed between them. Marge added softly. They're moving the money, planning a full liquidation by August. Jesus! Mara's voice sharpened. We're about to flip the table, aren't we? Marge leaned back into the bed, eyes on the ceiling. We're flipping the whole damn room. She heard footsteps downstairs. Voices. Laughter. She stood, crossed the room, and placed the bundle back into its hiding spot, smoothing the carpet over it with slow precision. Then, she opened the safe in her closet, untouched since her husband's death, and smiled. The lights in the clinic buzzed faintly above Marge as she signed in with a black ballpoint pen, her signature fluid and precise. The receptionist didn't look up right away, just tapped at a screen and said, "And your daughter will be joining." "No," Marge said evenly, her voice like ice cracking under weight. "Just me." The woman blinked. "Of course, Mrs. Keating. Dr. Halverson will be with you shortly." Marge took a seat in the waiting area, legs crossed, purse in her lap, the faint scent of cinnamon gum and hand sanitizer clinging to the room. Across from her, a young man flipped nervously through a magazine, his foot bouncing with anxiety. Marge didn't fidget. She didn't need to. She already knew what the tests would say. It wasn't vanity. It was muscle memory. Cognitive strength didn't come from puzzles and crosswords. It came from decades of navigating grief, raising a daughter who turned cold too early, sitting beside stroke patients as they learned to count again. She knew language, memory, control. She'd taught it, preserved it, defended it. Dr. Halverson appeared in the hallway, tall, lean, glasses that made him look permanently amused. "Mrs. Keating?" She rose without help, nodded politely, and followed him down the corridor, where soft music played from ceiling speakers, as if Beethoven might soften the blow of a bad diagnosis. Inside the evaluation room, Marge sat straight in the chair, not touching the desk, not commenting on the framed diplomas or the stress relief fidget cubes on the shelf. "Your daughter didn't come today?" he asked, logging into a computer. "No," Marge said. "I didn't invite her." He raised an eyebrow, then smiled. "All right then, let's begin." The tests started simple. Recall sequences, backward spelling, attention switching, pattern recognition, then language, then logic, then visual memory. It grew harder, more intricate, questions layered inside questions, and Marge never faltered. She repeated digits forward, backward, spotted inconsistencies in photos, finished metaphors, corrected him gently on a faulty premise in a word recall segment. At one point, he chuckled softly and leaned back. "You ever considered teaching neuropsychology?" "I taught speech-language pathology for 34 years, she replied. "That explains a lot." He tapped out the final notes on his keyboard. "Well, Mrs. Keating, I can tell you this now. These results are ironclad. You're scoring in the 98th percentile for executive function, visual spatial, memory, verbal fluency. Frankly, you're sharper than half my staff." Marge folded her hands in her lap. "I'll need a notarized printout, preferably with your signature and clinic letterhead. You'll have it by Friday," he said, both impressed and cautious. "If I may ask, why the urgency?" Marge smiled softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because someone keeps telling people I'm fading." 2 days later, Laura stood on the driveway in athleisure, chatting with Mrs. Winthrop next door, her voice pitched just loud enough for Marge, watering the ferns by the porch, to hear. "It's been hard," Laura said, pressing her hand to her chest like a tragic soap opera widow. "She gets overwhelmed so easily now. Little things confuse her. We're managing everything quietly for her sake." Marge clipped a dead leaf from the hanging basket. "Let the silence stretch." Mrs. Winthrop murmured something vaguely sympathetic. Laura continued, louder, "She just forgets." "It's sad, but at least she's peaceful, you know." Marge turned slightly, caught Laura's eyes for a split second, then gave her a serene, unbothered smile, the kind that always made Laura flinch, even as a teenager. Later that evening, Marge sat by the bay window, her tea steeping nearby, flipping through the pages of her test results. Stamped, signed, detailed, each page a scalpel she hadn't used yet. The landline rang. She picked up, expecting Mara. But the voice was deeper, smoother, one she hadn't heard in over a year. "Mrs. Keating." Mr. Doran said, crisp as the envelope he once hand-delivered her estate papers in. "Are you ready to transfer control?" Marge's gaze drifted to the yellow wristband, still folded in her clutch like a dried leaf. She smiled. "Yes," she said, "it's time." The sound of the fountain pen scratching paper echoed louder than it should have in Mr. Doran's office, a simple signature, drawn with steady, practiced control. No hesitation, no tremor, only finality. Doran glanced up from behind his oak desk. "That's the last one. Effective immediately." Marge placed the pen down beside her cup of Earl Grey, steam still curling from the rim. "And Laura and Ken? Stripped of all power of attorney, financial, medical, durable, revoked and recorded." Marge nodded once, eyes clear behind her tortoiseshell frames. "And Mara? Temporary POA until we finalize the trust restructuring. She'll have legal shield if anything turns hostile." Marge's lips curled into something like satisfaction, but quieter. Quieter than revenge, quieter than rage, just precision. Outside, the Michigan sky was soft with late-morning haze. A few leaves from the maple outside twirled downward, their descent effortless, like authority shifting hands. It didn't take long for the first tremor to reach Laura. Marge was arranging fresh tulips on the kitchen counter when the iPad dinged. Laura had linked her notifications to every shared account, investments, credit monitoring, even Marge's pharmacy. "Why did I just get a fraud alert from First County?" Laura asked, walking into the kitchen fast, barefoot, holding the iPad like a weapon. "It says someone changed authorization settings." Marge turned slowly, gently adjusting a bent tulip stem. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. I forget things, remember?" Laura froze mid-breath. "What do you mean you forgot?" Marge tilted her head. "I must have pressed something. These screens are confusing." It was almost fun, the way Laura's face spasmed between concern and suspicion, her polished veneer cracking just slightly. "We'll get Ken to look at it." Marge smiled kindly. "Ken's name doesn't belong on my accounts anymore." Laura blinked. "What?" she asked, too calm, like the edge of a plate starting to slide off a shelf. Marge hummed, folding the dish towel. "Would you be a dear and pick up more milk later?" Laura said nothing, but her phone was in her hand before she left the room. That afternoon, Alyssa posted a blurry photo of a backyard hummingbird feeder with the caption, "My grandma's really slipping lately, holding space for the journey." The likes trickled in. Sympathy came cheap online. Back inside the house, Marge opened her clutch and pulled out a printout, her notarized cognitive evaluation, folded precisely in thirds. She slid it into a file with the Doran documents, sealed it, and placed it behind the lining of her old luggage case in the upstairs guest room. The same case Laura had once called too worn out to keep. The same one Laura would never check. By evening, Ken was pacing the edge of the sunroom, glass of scotch in hand, murmuring to Laura, "She's not acting confused. She's acting calculated." Laura's voice snapped back. "She's playing us, or someone's feeding her ideas." "She's 79, Ken said, trying to believe it. "She was a speech therapist," Laura hissed. "You don't unlearn people like her." Marge sat in the living room. TV turned low, watching a rerun of Columbo. She could hear every word. She took a small sip of water, her pinky curved like a dancer's hand. Outside, the porch light flicked on. A scheduled notification popped up on her phone. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Real estate appraisal confirmed. Marge smiled into the glow of the screen. In 3 days, the house Ken and Laura had marked as a final asset, a cherry-on-top inheritance, would be opened like a ledger, and not a single column would add up in their favor. The first box Marge packed was lined with acid-free tissue paper. She didn't rush, each movement precise, her fingers gliding along the edge of the 1930s Limoges tea set, like she was memorizing its porcelain breath one final time. She hadn't touched the set in years, but she remembered where it came from. Not just the French market stall in Savannah, but the moment her husband had leaned in and whispered, "You're too elegant to drink from anything mass-produced." She wrapped each cup, each saucer, like a ceremony. And she didn't stop there. Within 2 days, she'd opened every closet, every cedar-lined trunk, and pulled out the things Laura had pretended were too dated to matter. The Tiffany lamp from her aunt's estate. The framed signed lithograph Ken once called basement art. The pre-war silver letter opener her father used the day he got his draft notice. She cataloged everything herself, using the old ledger system from her teaching days. Pencil first, ink when confirmed, museum donors, private buyers, registered gift declarations. Every item that left the house was tracked like an artifact, because that's what they were. Not clutter, not inheritance, proof. Of life, of choice, of legacy. When Alyssa stumbled in mid-morning, high ponytail swinging, the sight stopped her cold. Boxes, labeled, stacked, color-coded, half the art missing from the walls. Rugs rolled and tied, 2 delivery men hauling out a framed collection of Navajo textiles. "What is all this?" Alyssa's voice cracked between outrage and suspicion. "Are you hoarding?" Marge didn't look up from her clipboard. "I'm redistributing." Alyssa scoffed. "To where? Who even wants this stuff?" "The Detroit Historical Society, for starters." Marge capped her pen. "And the Montrose Library Foundation. The collection rooms will be dedicated in my name." Alyssa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her gaze darted to her phone. But for once there was nothing to post that wouldn't make her look foolish. "Shouldn't you run this by Mom?" "I thought I couldn't speak." Marge smiled without warmth. "Or did I misunderstand the wristband?" 20 minutes later, Laura was barreling into the driveway like her tires had a vendetta. Marge stood in the entryway, clipboard still in hand, calm as stone. The light through the front windows cast her silhouette tall and sharp across the hardwood. "What the hell is going on?" Laura snapped, breathless. "Why are there trucks here? Why is our art being carried out like thrift store junk?" "It's not your art," Marge said. "You're not thinking clearly. This looks unstable, erratic." Marge didn't flinch. "You said I didn't know what I owned, that I was confused. I figured it was best to declutter." Laura's eyes widened, jaw twitching. "You can't just give away family assets." "Actually, I can," Marge replied. "Would you like to see the documents?" Laura's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked around, realizing just how much was already gone. How many empty hooks lined the walls. "I'm not done," Marge added. "Just beginning." The doorbell rang. A man in a blazer and soft-soled loafers stood outside, clipboard in hand, camera slung around his shoulder. "Mrs. Keating? Here for the full estate appraisal." Laura spun toward Marge. "You called an appraiser?" Marge nodded. "For the house, and what remains in it. I want to know exactly what's mine. While I still remember, of course." The man chuckled politely, oblivious to the storm brewing behind him. "Lovely home, by the way. The architecture alone puts it in the high 7 figures before I even step inside." Laura's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "High what?" He stepped in and shook Marge's hand. "We've had a few sales recently in the area, not nearly as maintained as this. Your portfolio might surprise you." Marge turned slowly toward her daughter, her expression unreadable. "Yes, it might." 2 hours later, after touring every inch of the property and documenting every custom detail, the appraiser stood in the foyer with his final number. He showed Marge the tablet screen. Her brows lifted, just slightly. Then she nodded. "Please email the full report to my attorney." The appraiser left. The silence that followed was thunderous. Laura stared. "That number can't be right." "It's triple what you estimated last year," Marge said, her voice like velvet over steel. "Triple. Strange what you can miss when you assume someone can't count." Marge stood on the edge of the overgrown lot just after sunrise, her cane lightly stabbing the soft earth beneath her orthopedic shoes. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around her ankles like smoke. The property was quiet, still wild with brush, but the bones of what it once was were still there. The crooked wooden fence her husband built in '84, the sagging birdhouse Alyssa painted with glitter as a child, now weathered to bare wood. "Most people think legacy is what you leave behind," she murmured aloud, mostly to herself. "I think it's what you remove before you go." Behind her, a black SUV idled. The man from the trust stepped out, trim suit, thin folder in hand. "It's confirmed," he said, offering the paperwork. "Once filed, this land becomes a permanently protected historical site. No development, no resale, no reversal." Marge took the pen from his hand and signed with one long stroke. "Good. Let the town keep something pure." The trust agent glanced around. "This'll make headlines. Your family's okay with it?" She smiled gently. "They don't know yet." Back at her writing desk, not the fake craft station Laura staged for house tours, but her real one tucked in the attic dormer where the air smelled of cedar and paper, Marge filled out 3 more envelopes. One for the Community Arts Scholarship Fund, a full endowment in her name for local students pursuing music therapy. Another for the County Education Board, to sponsor early childhood speech-language screening programs, starting with the poorest zip codes first. And a third for the Montrose Library, where the blueprints of a new children's wing now bore the title, The Marjorie Keating Literacy Room. No fanfare, no family announcement, just checks signed, filed, and mailed with unwavering clarity. Each letter, each wire transfer, cut through Laura's inheritance plan like a scalpel through silk. When Mara arrived later that week, she took one look at the piles of confirmation letters and grant acceptances and laughed so hard she had to sit down. "You're not just burning bridges," she said between wheezes. "You're rerouting rivers." Marge handed her a mug of coffee. Black, no sugar, just how Mara liked it. "They wanted a shell. I gave them a monument." Mara leaned back, scanning the neat folders stacked on the table. "You sure about giving up the land? You could have sold it for millions." "I'm not giving it up," Marge said. "I'm giving it purpose." From her pocket, she pulled out a tiny velvet pouch. Inside, a tarnished, leaf-shaped brooch, her mother's. She pinned it to her lapel without ceremony. "Let them say I went soft. What matters is that I went first." 3 days later, a press release hit the inboxes of every local newsroom, submitted from an encrypted email address. Subject line: Montrose Matriarch funds multi-million-dollar philanthropy projects. Quietly, proudly, no byline, no photo, just facts, verified, irrevocable. By mid-morning, Laura's phone was lighting up with congratulatory texts. A local reporter left a voicemail. "We'd love a quote from you on your mother's extraordinary generosity and legacy vision." Laura stood frozen in the foyer, still clutching a half-empty bottle of kombucha. Alyssa, scrolling beside her, blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what is this? Grandma's donating land? Like, real land?" Laura hit redial, her voice low and cracked. "This can't be right. She doesn't even know what she owns." But Marge, upstairs, sipping tea and circling next week's Community Foundation meeting on her calendar, already knew exactly what they were reading. The air outside the Montrose Library felt heavier than usual, thick with humidity, with tension, with the scent of boxwood and fresh paint. A white canvas awning fluttered gently above the outdoor podium, strung with navy ribbons and the new engraved plaque just unveiled. The Marjorie Keating Literacy Room for Every Voice Once Dismissed. Marge stood beside it in a tailored slate-gray pantsuit, her garnet pin at the collar glinting in the morning light. The crowd, maybe 100 strong, clapped as the ribbon fell, some politely, others with genuine admiration. In the back row, Laura stood with crossed arms, Ken beside her, his jaw tight. Neither of them clapped. Alyssa angled her phone subtly, already live-streaming from her shoulder like it was second nature. "Big library dedication thing for my grandma," she murmured into her phone. "Kinda cute, right?" But the moment Marge stepped toward the microphone, the air shifted. The crowd quieted, not just respectfully, but expectantly, as if somehow they already sensed this would be more than a speech. Marge didn't clear her throat or adjust the mic. She just began. "I was told, very recently, that I wasn't expected to speak anymore, that it would be easier for everyone if I just sat quietly." A ripple moved through the audience. Mara, seated in the front, folded her hands and stared with sharp, unblinking pride. "I was also told, not in so many words, of course, that my mind was unreliable, that my choices needed to be managed for me, that my memories were inconvenient." She paused. Let the silence thicken. Across the grass, Ken whispered something to Laura, who whispered back through her teeth. This wasn't in the program. Marge continued, voice unwavering. There's a quiet cruelty to being written out of your own life. It doesn't always come with screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes with soft voices and legal documents. Sometimes it wears your last name. A few people gasped. Someone in the back muttered, Jesus. But here's the thing about memory. Marge placed her palm lightly on the podium. It doesn't just store facts. It stores patterns, lies, patterns of lies. And once you've seen the seams, you never unsee them. Alyssa panned her phone slowly toward Marge, still recording, until someone behind her tapped her shoulder. Put the phone down, a woman hissed. Alyssa started, but the audience was already shifting, murmuring disapprovingly. A man in a veteran's cap shook his head. Disrespectful, he said aloud. Marge ignored the stir. Her voice cut through it all. I reclaimed what was mine, piece by piece, quietly. But today, I wanted to say something out loud for the first time in a while. She turned slightly, gaze sweeping the crowd, landing nowhere and everywhere. I remember. I always remembered, even when you thought I didn't. Gasps again. Not scandalized, but shaken. A librarian near the front began to clap. Then Mara. Then a wave of applause broke out like thunder rolling through the park. Some people stood. A few had tears in their eyes. Behind the tent, Ken took a step backward. Laura's face was white. Alyssa ended her live stream. After the ceremony, Doran met Marge near the parking lot. His briefcase was open, a few brochures in hand. 3 people asked me for estate counsel during your speech, he said, half smiling. 2 said, and I quote, I want to protect myself like she did. Marge chuckled, slipping on her sunglasses. Good, let them take notes. Before she climbed into Mara's car, she handed Doran a stamped, sealed envelope. Please make sure this goes out tomorrow morning. Certified. Doran looked at the label. To Laura Keating. Subject, revocation enclosed. He glanced back at Marge, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Brutal. No, Marge said. Clean. Marge sat at the same mahogany desk Ken once called cluttered and quaint. Now it was cleared, save for one neat row of binders, each spine labeled with a year, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose. A mug of black coffee cooled beside her elbow, untouched. The only sound in the room was the soft flick of paper and the scratch of a blue archival pen. Every canceled check, every invoice, every wire. The numbers didn't lie, but people did. A receipt for a luxury ski rental in Vail, a first-class airfare to Miami with no return, a recurring floral delivery billed under in-home therapeutic ambiance. Thousands funneled out of the household account, all under Marge's name, masked as elder discretionary. Marge had trained graduate students in clinical documentation. She'd testified in probate hearings about financial consent and cognitive capacity. She knew what a lie looked like when it was built from math. She circled each line with a slow, steady hand. Blue ink, never red. Red bled emotion. Blue meant order. Later that week, Doran leaned across his office conference table, scanning the pages she'd handed him. His expression didn't shift, not with outrage, not with surprise, only sharp, surgical calculation. You have them cornered, he murmured. Not yet, Marge replied, folding her hands. But I've mapped the room. Doran slid the final sheet back toward her. The personal luxury expenses are provable. We'll file a complaint under breach of fiduciary duty. That opens the door for civil claims. Do it. She didn't blink. Doran raised an eyebrow. You're ready for this level of heat? I survived a war marriage, a daughter who stopped calling me mom the moment she turned 16, and a 35-year tenure at a public school with no air conditioning. She looked him dead in the eye. Let Ken try me. Meanwhile, Ken stood in the garage, arms crossed, watching Laura sift through their unopened mail pile, her forehead damp with sweat. What is this from Doran? She muttered, holding up a thick envelope with her name typed in clean black font. This doesn't look like billing. Ken didn't answer. She tore it open, her nails dragging jagged lines through the letterhead. Her eyes widened. "She filed a complaint?" she whispered. "With the court?" Ken stayed frozen. "She's accusing us of financial exploitation?" Ken exhaled once, long and shallow. Laura turned slowly. "Did you use the trust for the Tesla?" "It was a low-interest loan." "Ken, she doesn't have the stamina for litigation," he said quickly. "This is all bluff, theater, noise." But his voice cracked near the end, because what Ken knew, and Laura hadn't yet pieced together, was that the financial complaint wasn't about a few $1,000s. It was a pry bar, and Marge had just wedged it between the floorboards of their entire operation. Back at the house, Marge slid the final trust document into a manila envelope. Her hand hovered briefly over the folder that once read, "The Keating Family Trust." She crossed out family with a black Sharpie, then wrote, beneath it, "To be dissolved." Mara peeked her head into the study. "That last signature?" Marge nodded. "Done." "You're something else," Mara whispered. "I'm thorough," Marge said. "That's all." She tapped the folder once before sealing it. "I might be old," she said quietly, "but I remember where every dollar came from. And more importantly, where it should have never gone." The next morning, Laura opened the front door in her robe to find a plainclothes courier standing on the porch. "Delivery for Laura Keating," he said, holding out a small, official envelope. She took it with a frown, already sensing the storm before she even slid it open. Inside, a subpoena, filed, stamped, served. The courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and nerves. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an institutional glow on the polished wood bench where the judge sat. Stern, unreadable. A slow fan turned in the back, doing nothing to move the tension choking the air. Marge sat perfectly upright, her blazer crisp, hands folded neatly in her lap. On the table in front of her rested a thin leather folio, zipped shut. She hadn't brought a purse. She hadn't needed one. Across from her, Laura wore cream, always cream in court, her expression tight, lips glossed but pale. Ken fidgeted beside her in a suit that fit like it belonged to someone else. The skin around his collar was damp with sweat. "Docket 24-3156C, the clerk announced monotone. "Keating versus Keating. Motion to revise medical and financial power of attorney." The judge, a man in his late 60s with steel-colored hair and rectangular glasses, adjusted his bifocals and looked directly at Marge. "Mrs. Keating, can you confirm that this document is your signed request for removal of both Laura Keating and Kenneth Fields from your personal and legal affairs?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marge said calmly, with full understanding and without coercion. He flipped the folder open and glanced at the page beneath. "You've attached an independent cognitive exam." "That's correct," she replied. "Administered at Farewell Neurology 2 weeks ago, scored in the 98th percentile, notarized and verified." Laura shifted in her seat. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You'll speak when asked," the judge said, without looking up. Ken leaned toward her, whispering something that clearly didn't help, because Laura's jaw tensed tighter than before. The judge adjusted his glasses again and read aloud. "Client displays no signs of impairment. Memory, executive function, and judgment exceed age-appropriate expectations. Fully competent." He closed the folder with a firm snap. "This court recognizes Marjorie Keating as fully capable of making her own decisions. Request for removal is granted." Marge didn't move, didn't smile, but her fingers relaxed slightly like a piano player between songs. Laura jolted upright. "We request mediation." "Denied," the judge said before she could finish. "This is not a custody battle." Ken stood, stammering. "But there are estate complications, outstanding obligations, tax matters that—" "Mr. Fields," the judge said, finally meeting his eyes, "you are no longer relevant to this hearing." The silence that followed was brutal. Outside the courthouse, the sun was hot on the pavement. Reporters weren't present. This wasn't scandalous enough yet, but Mara was waiting by the car, iced coffee in hand. "Well?" she asked. Marge opened the passenger door slowly, gracefully. "They're gone." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Like, Officially? Legally, Marge confirmed. And permanently. Mara exhaled a long breath. Damn, that was fast. Marge tilted her head. It's not hard to remove someone who never belonged there in the first place. That afternoon, Alyssa posted a photo of a latte art heart captioned, "Family's messy. Don't judge." Within hours, the comments turned. "Maybe don't emotionally manipulate your grandma next time." "We saw the video, Alyssa. She outclassed you in every way." "So proud of Marge. Unproblematic icon." The post got ratioed so badly, Alyssa turned off replies by sunset. The following day, Marge returned to her reading nook. She tucked away the court documents in the bottom drawer and lit a lavender-scented candle, her favorite, the one Laura used to say gave her headaches. She poured herself a glass of Pellegrino, opened the morning mail, and found an envelope with elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly. "Dear Mrs. Keating, we've followed your recent contributions and public advocacy with great admiration. We would be honored to offer you a board position on the Oakland County Senior Equity Council. Your voice, experience, and clarity of vision are needed now more than ever." Marge reread the words twice, then folded the letter and set it down on the table. Not just heard, not just remembered, invited. She stood, spine tall as a bell tower, and dialed Mara. "They offered me a board seat." "You taking it?" Mara asked. Marge smiled, slow and satisfied. "I'm not just rebuilding my life," she said. "I'm going to help rebuild the rules." The forum went live on a Tuesday morning, quietly and without ceremony. No launch party, no PR campaign. Just a single post on a plain, clean website. White background, black text, a yellow banner across the top, unmistakable. Unmuted elders. For those they tried to silence. Marge sat at her laptop, her fingers slow but deliberate across the keys. She'd written the first post herself. If you were told to step aside when you still had more to say, this space is yours. If they managed your life before asking what you wanted, this space is yours. You are not voiceless. You are uninvited. We're changing that. The screen blinked, published, and the ripple began. Within a week, the first wave came. Caregivers, granddaughters, sons, a 71-year-old widower from St. Louis who posted, "I didn't know POA could be revoked until I found this site. My daughter forged my signature. I thought I was crazy." Marge read every comment, every message. She made tea twice a day and sat with the stories, the heartbreak, the rising anger. They didn't just want advice, they wanted truth, language, someone who'd been through it and came out standing. Mara set up the Instagram page. Calm fonts, stark quotes, no filters. Doran began recording short legal Q&As from his office, ending each video with, "Knowledge is leverage. Protect your future." Within a month, Unmuted Elders had 10,000 visitors. By month 2, they were being linked in university newsletters, gerontology classes, and estate planning blogs. Marge received a bouquet of yellow tulips with a handwritten note from Wisconsin. "They told me I was too confused to understand my own finances. You gave me the words. I kept my house. Because of you." Nancy B., 67. She kept the note on her fridge. Not for pride, for clarity. Meanwhile, the whispers in Montrose grew colder. Laura's Pilates instructor canceled her slot due to a scheduling conflict. A local women's club quietly voted her out of leadership. One member, after seeing Marge's speech replayed on a caregiving podcast, remarked, "She said her mother had no memory, but that woman didn't miss a single name." Ken's real estate seminars had lower attendance. His name, once printed in glossy brochures, was now missing from local sponsorships. Alyssa tried to rebrand too, started a series called Healing When They Won't Listen. But the comments were unforgiving. "Try listening to your grandma first." This is the woman who posted a picture of her slipping grandma, right? No thanks. Late one night, Marge was reading a submission from a 74-year-old in Arizona when Mara walked in with her phone in hand. "You've got mail," she said, smirking. "Email?" "No," Mara said, waving her phone. "The real kind." She handed Marge a sealed envelope, cream cardstock, thick and formal. Return address: National Council on Elder Justice, Washington, D.C., Marge opened it carefully, unfolding the single page inside. "We've followed your work with unmuted elders. Your clarity of message and personal integrity have become a galvanizing force in elder rights advocacy. We cordially invite you to be the keynote speaker at our annual summit this fall. Topic: When silence is forced, and how to break it." Marge stared at the paper, then reread it. "They want me to speak?" she whispered. Mara pulled out her phone and started typing. "They want you to lead." Marge set the letter down beside her laptop, where the original "No Speak" wristband still rested, folded, pressed flat like a pressed flower. She looked at it, then at the screen of her growing forum, where messages were still coming in. And this time, she didn't just feel remembered. Laura was off the list, off the loop, off the leash. She wasn't cut out, she was cut away. 2 days later, Marge was interviewed by a journalist writing about medical gaslighting. The reporter leaned forward with her recorder already running, her notepad balanced on one knee. She was young, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a softness in her voice that didn't match the ruthlessness of her profession. "I want you to take your time, Mrs. Keating," she said. "Whatever you remember, in your own words." Marge sat across from her in a high-backed armchair, the afternoon light pouring in through the sunroom windows and catching the thin gold rims of her glasses. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly interlaced. "No one asked me for my version before," she said calmly. "They just wrote it for me." The reporter's eyes flicked up. "You're referring to your birthday party last spring?" "Yes." Marge's voice didn't waver. "The memory care center. The lemon cake. The pianist was flat on the second verse of Unforgettable." She allowed a tight smile. A bit ironic, in hindsight. The reporter leaned in, sensing it. The shift in temperature, the faint icy tension just beneath Marge's perfect posture. "They put a yellow wristband on me," Marge continued, her voice steady but cool. "It said no speak. Not nonverbal, not quiet preferred, just no speak." She held up a small shadow box from the table beside her, and inside it, the folded band, preserved like a museum relic. The reporter stared. "And what happened when guests saw it?" "They looked away. They avoided me. They spoke over me like I was glass." She paused. "My granddaughter filmed me and said, 3 generations of women, well, kind of." The reporter blinked. "She said that?" "I remember every word. I remember the scent of the wine she spilled on the carpet, the sound of Laura whispering, 'It's easier if they don't expect you to respond.'" She met the reporter's eyes now. "Do I sound like someone who forgets things?" The recorder blinked red. Still recording, capturing every syllable like it was testimony. The piece was published online 2 weeks later. Branded silent, how families and institutions erase competent elders and get away with it. Byline: Rachel Dillard, Investigative Health and Policy Desk. It opened with Marge's image, posed beside the sunroom window, the yellow wristband floating in its frame like damning evidence, but it was the quotes that lit the fire. She remembered everything, down to the key signatures on a spreadsheet, but they called her confused so they could take her voice, and her estate. One line in particular began circulating online like wildfire. "They told everyone I couldn't speak, so I made sure they'd listen." Then came the photo. Alyssa's original post, long since deleted, was dug up by an advocacy group and reposted. The caption still read, "My grandma's slipping 3 generations kinda," but this time it was cropped, zoomed, focused not on Alyssa's glowing face, but on Marge's wrist, the yellow band, the words "No Speak," the party around her, polished, smiling, complicit. It went viral overnight. Elder abuse in plain sight trended by dawn. Marge's face, that expression of quiet, sharpened clarity, became a symbol. Dozens of commentaries followed. Doctors weighed in. Retired nurses posted testimonials. One even said, "I've put those wristbands on people. We were told it was for safety. I see now it was control. Alyssa tried to defend herself once. A vague TikTok. We all make mistakes. I was just trying to help." The comments eviscerated her. "You mocked her to her face. You deserved to be written out. No amount of filters can fix this. By the next evening, all her social accounts vanished. No farewell, no apology, just gone. The final blow came quietly, through email. Marge opened the message late at night, the room lit only by her desk lamp. The sender, Montrose Gardens Memory Center. Subject line, official policy change, resident dignity protocol update. The first sentence made her sit upright. Effective immediately, all color-coded patient wristbands have been banned from use in non-medical settings. Staff have received mandatory training in consent-based communication and capacity assessment. We regret the use of identifiers that contributed to misrepresentation or harm. Beneath that, a formal apology, not just to Marge, but to all residents, past and present. She didn't print it, she didn't post it, she simply smiled. The wristband, still folded in its frame, remained on the shelf behind her, but now everyone knew what it meant. The pen glided across the page in steady strokes, not rushed, not bitter, just final, like a surgeon finishing the last stitch of a long, delicate operation. Doran sat across the table, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, watching each signature with professional reverence. Beside Marge sat Mara, quiet as stone, a hand resting on her cane, the other curled into a fist on the armrest. "Executor line here," Doran said gently. Marge signed. "Mara, witness line here." Mara signed. The ink dried in seconds, but the consequences would last longer than most memories. "That's the last line signed," Doran said. "It's done." Marge leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The sun through the window lit the edge of the will, thick, bound, notarized, and now untouchable. No amendments, no loopholes, no heirs with second chances. The final estate was unlike anything Laura, Ken, or Alyssa could have imagined. There were no property divisions, no conditional trusts, no for future educational use. Marge had rewritten the entire concept of legacy in one document. Every cent from her retirement fund was earmarked for literacy initiatives, public library expansions, and pro bono elder advocacy clinics across the Midwest. Her investment portfolio? Split among historical preservation societies, elder law nonprofits, and scholarships specifically for first-time legal aid applicants over 60. The lake house? Deeded to a shelter for women fleeing domestic abuse, with instructions to create a garden in the back, modeled after her late husband's favorite perennials. Mara turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Are you sure about the no eligible descendant clause?" "I'm not angry," Marge replied. "I'm just finished." Alyssa's name had been carefully replaced with a single cold phrase, "No eligible descendant." Laura's name had been deleted entirely. Not struck through, not redacted, erased. It was as if, on paper, she'd never existed. "What if they try to challenge it?" Mara asked. "They can't," Doran answered. "I've sealed it through 4 mechanisms: testamentary capacity, notarized video, court-reviewed cognitive validation. Any attempt to dispute this will cost them more than they ever hoped to inherit." Marge looked up. Let them spend their energy fighting a ghost. She opened the top drawer of her desk and pulled out an envelope. Ivory, square, heavy. "What's that?" Mara asked. "The final letter," Marge said. "The one that doesn't go to anyone else." Mara's mouth twitched. "To who?" Marge smiled faintly. "To myself." She sealed the envelope with wax, the old-fashioned way, using the brass stamp her husband once gave her on their 15th anniversary. MK. Initials that now meant only what she said they meant. Later that night, Marge sat alone in her sunroom, the envelope resting in her lap. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves against the windows, and the air smelled faintly of sage and old paper. She reread the return address. Marjorie Keating, private, to be opened by addressee. Only. There was no recipient, because she already knew what it said. She wasn't trying to remember anything. She was recording it, for the one person whose voice had been the most trampled, the most misread, and now the most unassailable, her own. Across the room, the yellow wristband sat in its frame. She had spoken. She had reclaimed, she had redefined what legacy meant, not a chain passed down, but a wall rebuilt, brick by brick, and guarded by silence. A mail carrier arrived the next morning. Marge handed the envelope over herself. No hesitation. "Certified," she said. "Of course, ma'am," the carrier replied, tipping his cap. She watched as the van pulled away. The final thread had just left the driveway. No copies, no carbon, no digital trail, just her words, sealed and unchallengeable, heading back to the woman who'd refused to forget. The new garden outside the Montrose Library smelled of mulch, lilac, and fresh lacquer. Bees hummed over the lavender bushes. A pair of robins bickered in the oak tree overhead. On the lawn, children chased each other around a sculpture made from repurposed books, their laughter drifting between pockets of spring sunlight. The bench sat at the center of it all, simple, curved, steel-backed, and weather-treated wood, strong enough to last decades, soft enough to invite strangers. Etched into the metal plaque along the backrest were 14 words that didn't ask for attention. They demanded it. For those told to stay quiet, and refused. People walked by and read it without knowing her name, but they paused. Some nodded. One woman took a photo. Another sat down and cried quietly, for reasons Marge didn't need to hear to understand. Marge sat nearby with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a knit shawl draped across her lap. Mara sat beside her, tapping her cane in a lazy rhythm against the sidewalk. "This," Mara said, "is the opposite of a headstone." Marge smiled softly. "It doesn't mark an ending." "No," Mara agreed. "It's where something new begins." Across the path, Carla, the young librarian who'd first reached out after the foundation gift, walked toward them waving. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she had a clipboard tucked under one arm. She beamed at the bench. They already wanted to replicate it in 2 other branches, one in Lansing, one in Grand Rapids. Marge sipped her coffee. "Let them." Carla knelt to read the plaque again. Her voice dropped, reverent. "You didn't just speak, Marge. You roared." Then, quieter, she added, "And none of them can bury it now." The rest of the afternoon passed like a slow tide. Parents read to toddlers in the shade. Teenagers lounged with earbuds, slouched but present. A small group of seniors sat on the patio playing cards, the chatter soft, familiar. The scent of lilacs thickened as the sun dropped lower. Marge watched it all. She saw her fingerprints on the community, in the upgraded children's wing windows, the ramped walkways, the mural featuring historical women of the county, now including a figure that looked suspiciously like her younger self, arms crossed, lips unsmiling. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. As the crowd thinned, Marge reached into her satchel and pulled out the envelope. The one she'd mailed weeks ago, the one she'd addressed to herself. It was creased now, worn at the edges, but sealed with the wax stamp her husband had once pressed into every holiday card. She peeled it open slowly. Inside, folded precisely in half, was the yellow wristband. She stared at it. No tears, no flinch, just stillness. The fabric was soft, the letters still bold. No speak. Mara glanced sideways. "You sure you want to keep that?" "Yes," Marge said. "But not for them." "For who then?" "For the ones who come next." She took the band and placed it gently into the carved compartment beneath the bench, a hidden time capsule Carla had insisted on adding for educational legacy. It joined a copy of her speech, a page from her estate guide, a photo of the bench being installed. Marge closed the lid and twisted the lock. Let them find it someday. Let them understand what it meant. The morning light crept through the gauzy curtains like a quiet truth, gentle, unannounced, but impossible to ignore. Marge sat at her writing desk in a wool shawl, a mug of mint tea cooling beside her, and a worn black ledger open beneath her fingertips. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax polish and old ink. She turned to the final page, not blank, but waiting. Her obituary draft lay atop it, typed and triple-checked, formatted with the same exactness she once demanded of her students, 12-point Garamond, double-spaced, centered heading. It didn't begin with accolades or birthplaces. It began with voice. Marjorie Keating, speech-language pathologist, community advocate, and estate reformer, passed peacefully after living without apology, correction, or compromise. It moved slowly through facts, her years in public education, her founding of unmuted elders, the scholarships and legal resources that bloomed in her name. It named no enemies, but the silences in the draft spoke volumes. There was no mention of Laura, no reference to Alyssa, only the life Marge had built. Once out of view, now engraved in policy and presence. She traced the final line with her finger, just once. She remembered everything, and made sure we never forgot. Marge closed the ledger softly, as though tucking a child into bed. Her eyes drifted to the windowsill, where sunlight kissed the rim of the yellow wristband's display frame. It hadn't moved since she'd sealed it there. She'd thought once about burning it, but some artifacts weren't meant for fire. They were meant to outlive their shame. She stood slowly, steadying herself against the edge of the desk, and walked toward the sunroom, her steps slow but sure. Her cane stayed leaned against the wall. Today, she wanted to move with no assistance, not out of pride, but choice. Outside, the bench sat in morning shadow, dew still glistening on its backrest. The plaque below it had changed. Where once there was only a dedication, there was now a small addition, newly screwed into the metal. No speak, retired. It wasn't dramatic, just firm. Beneath it, the garden hummed with spring. Bees worked the lavender. 2 toddlers tugged at a bubble wand in a stroller. Somewhere behind her, a teen read aloud to a younger sibling in a sing-song voice, the sound of continuation. Marge took it in with a long breath, the kind that doesn't signal exhaustion but relief, like a bell that had stopped ringing but still vibrated with resonance. Mara joined her moments later with 2 coffees. "Did you finish it?" Marge nodded. "Every word." "And the last one?" She smiled. "Isn't a period. It's a ripple." They sat together in silence, sipping warm coffee as the day unfolded around them. No parade, no speeches, just presence. Later that afternoon, as clouds softened the edge of the sky, a small voice interrupted them. "Excuse me," said a girl no older than 8, freckles scattered across her cheeks. "Are you the lady from the stories?" Marge looked down, lips curling slightly. "Which stories?" The girl shrugged. "The ones about the bench, and the band, and remembering." Marge glanced toward Mara, who chuckled and looked away. "I might be," Marge said softly. "Why do you ask?" The girl pulled a notebook from her backpack, worn at the edges. "We're writing about brave people in school. I picked you." Marge blinked, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small laminated quote card she'd begun carrying, more for others than herself. She handed it to the girl. The child read aloud. "They gave me silence. I gave them history." The girl beamed. "That's really good." Marge winked. "You'll write better ones someday." The girl ran off, arms swinging. Back in her sunroom that evening, the golden light low across the floor, Marge sat once more by the wristband frame. She placed a copy of her obituary draft behind it, tucked, not displayed. Let it stay close to the symbol that started it all. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The bench spoke. The garden spoke. The laws would speak. The letter sealed in the time capsule would whisper for decades. And as the light dimmed into dusk, the plaque's final word caught the last kiss of sunlight. Retired.